Hello and welcome to a Sunny Book Nook. Today I am going to be going over the stats of all the books that I've read this year so far, and I've been using Book Riot's Google spreadsheet. The Google spreadsheet looks like this. I don't know if you can fully see that. There's all the books I've read, and it seems so far that I have read 61 books this year, and that's going to be a different stat from what it says on Goodreads, because on Goodreads it only counts books that you've read for the first time, and I did a couple rereads earlier this year, so that's counted in this as well. So I'm going to look at the charts I have and give you a breakdown. So far this year I have read 96.7% fiction books and 3.3% nonfiction books. And I have read most of my books via audio, because it says here that I've read 62.3% of my books on audiobook. I've read 27.9% of my books through print, like a physical copy, and 9.8% of them digitally. Most of the digital books, like the ones that I've read via Scribd or a PDF, it's usually something that's nonfiction or something that is a comic book. And in terms of audience, I have read 72.1% adult, 11.5% young adult, and 16.4% children's and middle grade. And that's a very interesting stat to me, because usually I feel like I read more young adult than middle grade and children's books, but I've been reading some more middle grade this year and more children's books, and I think a lot of them are really lovely. So I think that the writing style and the themes explored in middle grade are really wholesome and beautiful, and I understand why people read middle grade. And I think that reading middle grade and reading young adult when you're not a child is still really, really beneficial, and it's pretty good, I think, to do that as a reader, because you're kind of exploring audiences that aren't necessarily specifically targeted towards you, and the themes are just much more gentle, I think, and everything is presented in a way that is much more gentle. Also, I'm so hungry right now. I haven't eaten anything today, and it's like midday, and so if my stomach rumbles, that's why. Also, I'm realizing that I didn't reapply my lip gloss before filming, so let me do that. I'm using the Fenty Cream lip gloss. I think that the cream line is I like it better than the sparkly gloss bomb ones, mostly because I don't really like glitter that much in terms of lip products, because I feel like it can get crusty sometimes. But I think that the flavor of the Fenty cream balms, the cream lip glosses, are kind of weird tasting. I don't know, they just feel a little bit heavier, I guess, but that's fine. They're not sticky at all though. They're really soft. Anyways, back to my stats. In terms of form, I have read 73.8% prose books, so books that are written in typical prose form. I have read 3.3% picture books, 4.9% short story collections, 1.6% essay collections, 11.5% comics, and 4.9% novellas. And in terms of genre, I have read... The biggest genre that I've read from this year is 32.8% fantasy, which is interesting to me because I feel like I'm not that big of a fantasy reader, but this year I think I've been delving into it a bit more, and I feel like I've categorized some of the books that I read as fantasy, even if they were more magical realism or speculative, because there wasn't really another category for it in this chart, at least. And then the next biggest section I have is general fiction, which makes up of 21.3% of my reading so far, and 13.1% of my reading has been sci-fi, 8.2% has been romance, 4.9% has been historical, 13.1% has been mystery/crime, 1.6% has been memoir or biography, and 3.3% have been current events and politics. And in terms of publishing date, I have read 18% books that were published in 2021, and 82% books that are backlist, which is very interesting to me. I do feel like I read way more backlist than I do new releases, simply because keeping up with new releases is really hard for me because I'm such a mood reader. And in terms of page count, I've read 10 books that are less than 100 pages long. I've read 8 books that are between 101 and 200 pages. Oh, actually, this is a bit of an overlap, I think. I'm not sure. And then I've read like 17 books that are between 201 pages and 300 pages. And my biggest category is 20 books in 301 to 400 pages. I read 4 books that are 401 to 500 pages, and 1 book that's 501 pages to 600 pages, and 1 book that's 601 pages to 700 pages. So I think I've been reading longer books recently. I really enjoy short books because it makes me feel really accomplished when I get it done. But I'm proud of myself for getting into some like thick tomes this year so far. In terms of book source, like where I got the book, 63.9% of the books I got through my library. So usually Libby, Hoopla, or I included Scribd as a library because even though it's you have to pay like $12 a month for a subscription to it. It is basically a digital library. And I've borrowed 1.6% of the books I've read, meaning borrowed them from a friend. I've had 9.8% of the books I've read as review copies, so usually ARCs or ALCs, like advanced listener copies through Libro FM's influencer program. And 19.7% of the books I've read this year are from my own TBR, so they're on my TBR shelves. They're physical books that I've owned and have been meaning to read, so that's about 20% of the books I've read so far this year, which is good. And 4.9% of the books I've read this year are ones that I've purchased this year. So I think that's a pretty good balance. I, borrow most of my books from the library, and I think that's just always going to be the case. In terms of star ratings, I have rated 0 books, 0 stars, or half stars, or 1 stars, or 1.5 stars. Mostly because if I hate a book that much, why would I even read it? Like, it's just not, I don't feel joy from hate reading books. And the books, I've read like 3 books that I've given 2 stars, about 2 books that I've rated 2.5 stars, and I have read about 13 books that I've rated 3 stars, 5 books I've rated 3.5 stars, and 23 books that I've rated 4 stars, 2 books that I've rated 4.5 stars, and 6 books that I've rated 5 stars. So it seems that I've had a pretty good average reading month, like lots and lots of 5 stars. That's the biggest bar on this graph by far. Yeah, I've been reading a lot of 4-star books, and I think I'm good at gauging my own taste. Like, I can understand whether I'm going to enjoy a book when I pick it up or not, usually. So yeah, I think I'm pretty good at that. And in terms of gender breakdown, about 65.6% of the books that I've read are by female authors, 23% of the books I've read are by male authors, and 8.2% of the books that I've read are by non-binary authors, and 3.3% of the books that I've read are by people who don't identify as any of those particular gender categories. And in terms of nation of origin, I've read 71.2% based in the US, which makes sense. I am in the US. And then 18.6% of books based in the UK, 3.4% of books based in Nigeria, 1.7% of books in New Zealand, 1.7% of books in Canada, and a couple other 1% in other countries that aren't listed here. In terms of POC authors versus white authors, I've read 60.7% white authors and 39.3% authors of color this year, and I think that just means I need to read more authors of color for the next months of the year. I think the goal is probably to read 50% white authors, 50% non-white authors, so I think I can get there. In the month of May, I think I'm going to be reading exclusively Asian authors for Asian Readathon, and I'll do my TBR for that, and also me and Steph's book club announcement for that in another video. Then in terms of queer authors and artists, I've read 59% books by non-queer artists and 41% of books written by authors who identify as queer or LGBT of some sort. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty good balance, I think, like 60-40. Again, I think I'm going to obviously be reading more queer books for the rest of this year, so I'm excited to increase those percentage numbers. In terms of own voices books, I've read 59% own voices books and 41% non-own voices books. So that's really cool for me, I think. And in terms of reading for representation or reading books that happen to be an accurate representation of what an author experiences, writing into their character or writing about their own life experiences. So that's exciting. And I've only read 3.3% books that are translated. So the vast majority of the books I read are, 96.7% of the books I've read this year so far are non-translated. So I want to pick up some more translated books for the rest of the year, obviously. So that's all the data I have on my reading. That's my data breakdown so far. I think that I am pretty happy with all of these stats, and I think that tracking my reading this year for the first time, because in the past I've never used a spreadsheet, I've never written down every book that I read and then categorized and determined the page count and the publisher and the author, and I didn't write any of that down, and I would just kind of compile all that information at the end of the year, but it's not as accurate as keeping it up to date as you go along, obviously. So I am proud of myself for reading so much this year so far, and I'm excited to read even more. I'm excited to explore even more of my TBR and the books that I've wanted to read for a long time. So those are all my stats for the first quarter, or the first third, I guess, of the year so far. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stupid bullshit. I will see you in my next video. Bye!